Hello there, everyone. So today we're going to continue talking about, countries and things like that that are and like what they're doing in the Renaissance, and this is just more about kind of establishment and how some of them are changing. Not necessarily all of their policies. We will be getting to that a little bit later. Okay, so we're starting with Spain, and basically, I'm going to talk about how Spain is going to go downhill, because, that's what happens. We talked about their height in the 1570s, and we already got to that, and then Philip II and the Armada, which took a huge hit, and then we start to see the problems, okay? Philip III, who is the gentleman over there to your right. So Philip III initially gets his country out of debt, but then he decides to spend a ridiculous amount of money on the court and his palace and things like that. And the country had gone bankrupt first in 1596. Philip helped it out, and then they went bankrupt again in 1607. And the reason why they're going into bankrupt is because they have really poor economic policies. There really isn't a middle class. Spain never tries to really put a lot of money in industry. All the taxes are on the peasants, and they can't really do anything. And there are too many priests and monks. Now, priests and monks aren't necessarily bad, but the problem is with this economic policy is that priests and monks have to be taken care of, so a lot of the taxation money goes to that. And it just straight falls apart into a catastrophic nightmare. And then we have some more things go on. Now, initially, we get here Philip IV. You have them. You have him over there on the right, looking just fantastic. He is going to be the king, but he has an advisor, Gaspar de Guzman, who is really the one that dominates the country. Most of the things that were going on were done by him, and he saw the economic problems that Spain was facing, and his solution, and rightfully so, was to tax the nobility, because he understood that if the nobility had taxation and they had more effective taxation, as a result, they would actually gain more money. Sadly, the nobles resisted too much, and they just really couldn't get involved. And then under Guzman, they get involved in the 30 Years' War, and, that doesn't work out because they go massively in debt and lose most of their army. And then under Philip V, you have the War of Spanish Succession. We talked about that under France. We've basically been there. And Spain is done as a European power. And this is important to understand. They're not going to be able to dominate Europe as much as they formerly did, but they still have a world empire. So Spain is going to be a player, okay? You look at everything they control over here in the New World, like that's stupid, a little bit here, and then, of course, the Philippines. And Spain's going to kind of plug along, if you will, really until the late 1800s when the United States is going to tag him in a war. But other than that, there's not too much success they'll have within, again, Europe itself. Now, moving on to the development of Brandenburg-Prussia, which eventually will just be Prussia. This is going to be led by the Hohenzollern family. That's right, I totally said that right. And what's going to happen is this family is going to be really, really intelligent. What they're going to do is gain land through inheritance and marriage. And what will really help them is when they become electors in the Holy Roman Empire. Again, one of those top 7 nobles who has the ability to elect the king. And they didn't have to do it through war or anything like that. And look at this. They built this beautiful castle. Word on the street is this was the castle that inspired Cinderella's castle in Disney World. For all you Disney freaks out there, if you're not a Disney freak, I mean, it's just an awesome castle. Now, the key leader for these guys is Frederick William the Great Elector, who was the main elector from 1640 to 1648. Okay, he does come to power after the 30 Years' War, and what he's going to do is really focus on building a strong central standing army. Okay, they'll have an army that has 40,000 men, which in the 1600s is really, really big in Europe. They're actually going to dedicate 50% of the revenue in their country to the army. So they're not messing around, okay? And what they're going to create is something called the General War Commissariat to actually levy taxes and oversee the growth and training. So I guess you could say they're going to effectively build like a Department of the Defense, that their job is to not only raise money for an army, but to train them and find ways to improve them. In dealing with nobles is going to be an issue, and we've talked about this before. We're going to talk about it a lot about it moving forward, but he understood that nobles, because he lived in the Holy Roman Empire, could like totally screw all this up. So what he decided to do was to give nobles the opportunity to become members and officers within the army, which gave them lots of, what's the word I want to say? Lots of increased reputation. It gave them, ability for advancement and to gain favor of the king, if you will. And basically what's going to happen is that they are going to follow the rules of rules and regulations, but within their own lands, they're going to get to do kind of whatever they want over peasants. And then the final kicker here is that the nobles won't have to pay taxes. Finally, for economic plans, he is going to build more roads and canals. He's going to increase tariffs on foreign goods, which will help them. He's going to subsidize industry. He's going to allow monopolies to start early, but then knock them down later. We'll get into all of that type of stuff. And you're really, really going to have incredible success in developing Brandenburg-Prussia into an actual nation. Now, it is under his son, Frederick III, that he will be given the title of King of Prussia from the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was just really falling apart. They were having trouble. They couldn't really control a lot. The Hapsburgs were a mess. And so, actually, what the Habsburg kind of will intelligently do will let some areas go. And in doing that, by letting those areas go, they will keep themselves stronger. And so Frederick III will get the title of King of Prussia, and Prussia becomes an independent country, and we're going to talk about them a lot. Okay, so back to the Habsburgs, who pretty much I've talked about being regularly beaten into a pulp. They are still around. They are massively hurting out of the 30 Years' War. They are massively hurting from the Reformation. They've lost tons of land. A lot of the German states rolled. So what they are going to do is they're going to refocus everything on their original homeland of Austria. So what they are going to do is they're going to consolidate Austria, which you see kind of the main part of Austria is actually over here, and then slowly but surely expand into Slovenia, Croatia, Bohemia, Silesia, which is up here, and the city of Prague, super important, Galicia, Hungary, and Transylvania. Yes, that Transylvania, Dracula, who was a real guy, and we'll talk about him later. And in order to do this, their main rival is going to be the Ottoman Empire. See the Ottoman Empire down there. And you have areas like Wallachia and Moldavia right here. They're often going to fight over them. The key change will happen in 1683. In 1683, the Ottoman Empire, as you see down here, is actually going to drive all the way to Vienna. And so they're going to control most of this land. But in Vienna, they are going to be able to stop them. That's a huge turning point in history for the Habsburgs to survive. It's going to prevent the Ottomans from further incursions into Europe as well. Now, governing in Austria is tricky. If you look at the map to the right, that is a map of all the different ethnic groups and the areas that they technically controlled. It is crazy. So, technically, the Habsburg king has the titles of, he is the Archduke of Austria, he's the King of Hungary, and he's the King of Bohemia, or Queen, which we'll talk about. Now, because of all these ethnic groups, the problem was getting everybody to accept a ruler that wasn't their ethnicity. So what happened is they allowed each territory to have a States General to take care of domestic issues, okay? So each area, like Bohemia and Galicia and Transylvania, would have kind of a committee or sometimes even a high noble that would rule like the domestic day-to-day stuff. They had to answer to the Habsburg Emperor, all right? And as a result, they kind of had this agreement. And what the Habsburgs will do is then focus a lot of their money into the military, grow the military, expand their empire, and everybody seems to be pretty happy. Winging around, then we have in Scandinavia, okay, we have a couple different empires that are working there. One is Denmark. We talked about this under the 30 Years' War. King Christian V, who ruled quite a long time, or lived quite a long time, from 1558 to 1648. I mean, the guy was 90 when he died. It was pretty impressive. He will control much of Denmark and modern-day Norway, okay, as well as having claims in Iceland, which is over here. Now, this is much larger than you would see today. Today, Denmark is really just like that. But evidently, it's like one of the happiest places in the world to live. We'll discuss. Now, they are going to have some interesting things. They have an elected monarchy through the nobles. But one of their issues is that their peasants actually don't have any rights and are controlled by the nobles. And that's going to cause some problems long term. But after the 30 Years' War, which of course ended in 1648, the year Christian V died, they're going to have some problems. They fight in the 30 Years' War, and that doesn't help them. And then like right after the 30 Years' War, which they're on the losing side of, they get hit in a war with Sweden in what is known as the Great Northern War, okay, in which they will end up losing a lot of their holdings in Norway. And as a result of poor leadership, they will actually have a coup. Now, a coup will actually end up being a good thing, because what's going to happen, it's going to be bloodless. They're just going to get rid of the king. They're going to create a hereditary monarchy with a constitution. So they're going to have a government similar to England, okay? And nobles would be the chief office holders. And they're going to just scale everything back. Now, this is going to be crucial, because we will talk about Denmark moving forward, but in this time, they kind of hit their peak and then they fall down. Same thing will happen with Sweden. We talked about this before. Everything changes under Gustavus Adolphus. He becomes the king, and before he was the king, they were relatively poor, and it was an underdeveloped nation. What's going to happen? He's going to put nobles in charge of the bureaucracy, and he's going to actually give the central government power to do something. They're going to raise taxes, they're going to build a military, and they're going to focus on trade. And as you can see, they're able to expand their empire. Here is modern-day Sweden. They take over Norway, Finland, nice chunks of Russia, as well as modern-day Estonia, Latvia, and even parts of modern-day Germany. They scored that after the 30 Years' War. So Gustavus Adolphus will die, and not surprisingly, there's a little bit of a dynastic war on who should be in charge. They had to deal with issues with peasants and religious upheaval, until finally Emperor Charles XI is able to come into power. He is going to kind of settle everything down. He will also expand the country a little bit and rebuild the army. And then under, Emperor Charles XII, a man over here, they are going to get to the height of their power. All Baltic Sea trade was controlled by the Swedes. They will get this is the empire under their largest underneath him. But eventually they start going toe-to-toe with Russia, and once Russia modernizes, that is going to the end of Sweden. And then finally, as well as the positive things, I'm going to talk about the Dutch Republic. The Dutch Republic is known as the United Provinces. It started in 1581. They will reach their peak in the 1600s, and they actually officially become a nation after the 30 Years' War, which we talked about already, in 1648. Now, the Dutch government is going to be a little bit different, okay? So you have the Northern Dutch, the Southern Dutch, and then eventually they combined to be the two. Each province, so it was kind of like a collection of city-states, okay? Each province had a stadtholder who led the provinces, raised an army, and ran day-to-day stuff, okay? Now, starting with William of Orange, who we talked about before, what they started to do was to try to get one king, if you will, to centralize the government and kind of become in charge of all the stadtholders, okay, and creating a hereditary monarchy. However, within each province, you also had a States General, which was like a little mini parliament that was made up of representatives from each province. So they wanted to try to keep the Dutch a republic instead of allowing the Dutch to become a kingdom, which is what William wanted. They do end up fighting a series of wars, and as a result, that is what allows William III to become King of the Netherlands. Okay. Now, we'll talk about this later. That will kind of fall apart, though, after William dies without an heir. All that matters about the Dutch is their economics. You see over here, you know, fun, that is Amsterdam, and it's beautiful and gorgeous, and one day I'll go there. They'll put lots and lots of money into shipping, and everything is going to be about the city of Amsterdam. The population is going to hit 200,000 people by 1660. It was designed to be based around canals for easy transport of people and goods, and it becomes just a huge hub of not only exporting goods, but trading goods that they would get from the outside. And really, they were the #1 supplier in guns. Then they also supplied wool, refined sugar, and tobacco, glass, beer, paper, books, jewelry, and leather. Okay, and that's what they made. And if they didn't make it, they traded in it. The only equivalent today I could say of this is like Dubai. Dubai has a lot of industry. It's this tiny little area, but they also have businesses within it that get all this trade going. And this is going to bring the Dutch stupidly huge amounts of money. Okay. They're also going to build probably the top navy in the world. They're going to build a type of ship called a fluit. For their navy that was designed to carry massive amounts of cargo, and they will also allow navies to build their own fleet, which was subsidized by the government. We've talked about banking. They had the largest public banks in Europe. This is actually the original bank, to give you an idea of how big it was, just the building. That was the Exchange Bank of Amsterdam, and they also created the, we've talked about this before, the nations, or not the nations, but Europe's First Stock Exchange, over here on the right, which is still existing today. And the guys that ran the show were the bankers and the merchants and the shipyard owners. It was interesting, like the government set policy, but the merchants ran everything. And I'll get that a little bit deeper in class. But it all doesn't work out in the end for everybody. Okay, Poland, unfortunately, this is a nation that is going to disappear. In the 1300s, the Grand Prince of Lithuania, Jagiellio, will marry King Jadwiga of Poland. I think I said that right, but if I'm wrong, sorry. My grandmother, who was born in Poland, will be very angry at me, but I tried. They will get married and create Poland-Lithuania, which at its time would be one of the largest land area nations in Europe. Modern-day Poland, modern-day Lithuania, as well as parts of Germany and the Ukraine. Now, the monarchies were actually elected and officially become a commonwealth, just like England, in 1569, okay? And they had a parliament known as the Sejm. I'm totally saying that wrong, I'm sorry. Basically, the Sejm was made up of landowners and some prominent townspeople. They controlled taxes and military policy. The king ran the economy, and the ruler had to agree to rule with them if they wanted to be elected. Okay, nobles also had serfs, but again, you know, kind of this constitutional monarchy type situation. Now, there are eventually going to be problems that will develop. because the marriage of the two houses was so successful, after the last Jagiello king died, the nobles decided to try something different because they wanted to avoid a dynastic war. So what the Sejm agreed on is that they would elect outsiders to be their kings in the hope that they would use these outsiders to expand the land of Poland-Lithuania, as you see the flag there, through marriage. But what they unfortunately did is that they gained more power and they gave less power to the monarchs to do anything, and then they allow individual members of parliament to suspend deliberations if they had major issues with how things were going. And what they end up doing is they gridlock themselves so that the government doesn't really do anything. And what's going to end up happening is that they get embroiled in a bunch of wars in the 16 and the 1700s that they're just not prepared for. Okay, and slowly but surely they're going to lose land until finally it all falls apart. In 1791, they realized that the chaos had totally weakened them. They had lost outside land, most of their land in like the modern-day Ukraine and Germany, that was all gone, and they had lost an initial chunk to Prussia. So they create an official constitutional monarchy with a hereditary king. Everything's going to be going good. They create a constitution in 1791, but in 1795, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, sensing weakness, will all invade, and Poland will disappear until 1919. Okay, so devastating results. But in the end, you see the development of new nations, the expansion of other nations, the fall of other nations, and it's just never bored. All right, guys? So make sure we get our assignment done with this, and I'll see you in class.